The gym was almost empty. Only a few overhead lights remained on, casting long shadows across rows of machines, benches, and steel weights that seemed heavier in the silence than they ever did during the day, while rain tapped softly against the high windows and the faint sound of distant traffic echoed through the darkness outside. And despite the stillness, one corner of the gym carried a different kind of weight. Not physical weight, but the kind that follows disappointment home and refuses to leave. A young man sat alone on a bench. A rejection email glowed on the screen of his phone. Another opportunity gone. Another attempt failed. Another plan that had not worked. For months he had told himself that persistence would eventually pay off, that hard work would be rewarded, that effort would matter. Yet here he was again, exactly where he did not want to be. And the worst part was not the failure itself. It was a story beginning to form around it. The dangerous story. The one that whispers, maybe you're not good enough. Around him the gym remained silent. The weights waited. The mirrors reflected exhaustion. And beside the squat rack stood Friedrich Nietzsche, calm, observant, watching not the failure, but the meaning attached to it. The young man stared at the email one final time before locking his phone. Then he asked the question that countless people ask after disappointment. How many times can a person fail before they should stop trying? The gym felt even quieter after he asked it, because some questions are heavier than any weight in the room. And Nietzsche did not answer immediately, because the most important answers often begin with silence. The gym remained silent. The weights still rested on the racks. The mirrors still reflected rows of machines, empty benches, and a version of the young man he no longer wanted to look at. Outside, rain continued striking the windows. Inside, failure felt louder than everything else. Because once disappointment enters the mind, the world outside often becomes quieter, not because anything changes, but because attention moves inward toward doubt, toward frustration, toward the dangerous questions that failure always seems to bring with it. And the young man sitting alone beneath the dim lights felt that shift, even if he could not fully explain it, because something had been introduced that did not fit with the story he had spent years believing, the story that effort always leads directly to reward, that hard work always creates success, that persistence guarantees results. And when those stories begin to crack, awareness begins to grow, and awareness is rarely comfortable. The young man looked down at the rejection email once more, then toward the weights, then toward Friedrich Nietzsche. And after several silent moments, he asked another question. If failure keeps happening, how do you know it isn't trying to tell you to quit? The question carried something deeper now. Not disappointment, not anger, but exhaustion. And exhaustion is dangerous because it disguises surrender as wisdom. Nietzsche answered calmly. He said that most people do not fear failure. They fear what repeated failure might mean about them. And the words settled heavily into the room, because suddenly the problem looked different. Perhaps the rejection was not the real source of pain. Perhaps the real source of pain was a conclusion attached to it. The conclusion that failure equals inadequacy, that rejection equals worthlessness, that losing means being a loser. And Nietzsche continued. He said that modern people often treat failure as evidence that they are not talented enough, not intelligent enough, not capable enough, not deserving enough. But failure is not evidence. Failure is information. The young man remained silent because something inside him had already begun to shift. Not confidence, not hope, understanding. And understanding is often more powerful than motivation, because motivation comes and goes. Understanding stays. The rain continued tapping against the windows. The gym remained nearly empty. And Nietzsche continued. He said that people admire success because success is visible, but they rarely admire the invisible process that created it. The hundreds of failed attempts, the mistakes, the embarrassment, the uncertainty, the repeated moments where quitting seemed reasonable. And yet those moments are often where transformation begins. The young man looked toward the squat rack, toward the heavy weights stacked neatly beside it. And Nietzsche noticed, so he pointed toward them. He said that nobody walks into a gym expecting the first weight they lift to be the heaviest. Nobody expects immediate strength. Nobody believes growth should happen instantly. Yet outside the gym, People expect immediate mastery, immediate success, immediate achievement. And when reality refuses to cooperate, they call themselves failures. The words move deeper than anything before them because they expose the contradiction. People accept struggle in physical growth, but reject struggle in personal growth. One of the few remaining gym members nearby quietly paused his workout and listened because everyone understands failure. Everyone understands disappointment. Everyone understands the feeling of giving everything they have and still falling short. And Nietzsche continued. He said that repeated failure becomes dangerous only when a person allows it to define their identity. Because the moment failure stops being an event and becomes a self-description, growth begins to die. The young man lowered his eyes because he recognized exactly what Nietzsche meant. For weeks, he had not simply been experiencing failure. He had become it. Every rejection had slowly changed the way he described himself, the way he viewed himself, the way he imagined his future. And that realization hurt more than the rejection itself, because what they were feeling was no longer disappointment. It was something far more unsettling, a quiet realization that the greatest obstacle might not be failure at all. It might be the identity built from it. The rain continued falling outside. The weights remained exactly where they were. But for the first time that night, the young man was no longer asking whether he had failed. He was beginning to ask something far more important. Who was he becoming because of it? The gym remained silent. The weights still rested on the racks. The rain still tapped softly against the windows high above the training floor. Nothing had changed. And yet, somehow, everything felt different. Because something had shifted, not in the gym, not in the rejection email still sitting unread on a young man's phone, not in the opportunities he had lost or the goals he had failed to reach, but in the way he now understood failure itself. And that difference was enough to change everything. Because once a person begins to see failure differently, failure loses much of its power to define them, and the few people scattered throughout the gym felt it, even if they could not fully explain it. Because something had been introduced that did not require agreement to exist, something that had already begun to alter the way they understood success, talent, resilience, disappointment, and the invisible relationship between suffering and growth. And that alteration is what makes an idea dangerous. Not because it removes failure, but because it removes fear. And Friedrich Nietzsche stood calmly beside the squat rack, not as someone untouched by setbacks, but as someone who had stopped demanding that life reward him before it transformed him. And that difference was impossible not to notice, because most people want results. Very few want transformation. The young man remained seated. His phone still contained the rejection. The opportunity was still gone. Nothing practical had changed, and yet he no longer felt trapped inside the same story. Then he asked one final question, the question hidden beneath almost every failure. The question people ask when they're exhausted, when they're discouraged, when they are close to giving up. What if I never succeed? The gym felt quieter after he asked it, not because the sound disappeared, but because the question reached deeper than ambition. It reached fear. Nietzsche answered calmly. He said that most people spend their lives chasing success because they believe success will justify their suffering. The words settled heavily into the room because everyone understands sacrifice. Everyone wants proof that their effort mattered. But Nietzsche continued, the value of struggle is not that it guarantees victory. The value of struggle is that it changes the person who struggles. The young man listened carefully, because for the first time that night, the conversation was no longer about achievement. It was about becoming. And becoming is always more important than achieving. A weightlifter nearby quietly re-racked a heavy barbell. The metal echoed through the room, and Nietzsche pointed toward it. He said that every weight in his gym exists for one purpose: resistance. Without resistance, there is no strength. Without difficulty, there is no adaptation. Without challenge, there is no growth. And life follows the same principle. The words move deeper than anything before them, because they did not describe failure as an interruption. They described it as training. Training for patience. Training for discipline. Training for resilience. Training for a version of yourself that cannot be created any other way. The rain continued falling. The gym remained quiet. And suddenly the young man realized something he had been unable to see before. The rejection was not the opposite of the journey. It was part of the journey. The failure had not removed him from the path. It was a path. A long silence settled over the room. Then Nietzsche slowly turned toward the exit. The light seemed dimmer now, the rain softer, and before leaving, he spoke one final time. He said that weak people ask life to become easier. Strong people become stronger because life refuses to, and the words settled over the gym with quiet finality because they did not promise success. They promised responsibility. They did not promise victory. They promised growth. And growth is always heavier than achievement because achievement can happen once. Growth becomes part of who you are, and no one spoke after that because there was nothing left to blame, nothing left to justify, nothing left to fear. And as Friedrich Nietzsche disappeared into the darkness beyond the gym floor, the young man remained exactly where he was. The rejection still existed. The uncertainty still existed. The future remained unknown. And yet, he no longer felt the same. Because once a person realizes that failure is not proof of weakness, but the resistance required to build strength, they cannot fully return to the comfort of seeing it any other way.